Hello and welcome to the second video for the series in Measurement and Math for Science. This is the second video which will address metric prefixes. In the last video we touched on the fact that we have 7 fundamental quantities in SI, or the System International, or the metric system. And in this video we're going to look at what happens if we have very large numbers of meters, or we have very small fractions of meters, or any of the other 7 quantities. And the way that we deal with this mathematically is we use what are called prefixes. So it's common for very large distances for us to have a unit, instead of a meter, to have a unit of kilometer. And same thing, well, in mass, the kilogram is already a multiple of the base unit grams, and that K is called a prefix, and it means something. Typically we don't have prefixes associated with temperatures, but we can definitely have, for very small time periods, we can have milliseconds, or we can have microseconds, and we'll talk about those symbols. Base units come in 2 types. They either make the base unit bigger, or they make the base unit smaller, where we have a fraction of the base unit. So if we look at a typical prefix chart, we see all kinds of symbols over here to the side, and we see their name, and we see the multiplication factor. Recall that 10 to the something bigger, equal to or bigger than 1, multiplies the number and makes it bigger. So when we use the example of 5 kilometers, the kilo is a factor of times 1,000, 10 to the third. So if we have the quantity 3 km, what we're really saying is the K stands mathematically for a number which is 1,000. So we could rewrite this 3 times 10 to the third meters, and that K is represented by the times 10 to the third. Now the other way that we can write that is simply 3,000 meters. And so by understanding that K means to multiply by 10 to the third, we can rewrite 3 km as 3 times 10 to the third, and we know that that represents 1,000. Now notice there's a breaking point here. Deca means times 10. We hardly ever use that. We hardly ever use deca. We hardly ever use hecto. Primarily, you will see kilo, mega, and sometimes giga. And those represent 10 to the third, 10 to the sixth, and 10 to the ninth, or 1,000, a million, or a billion. And so anytime you have these prefixes out in front of a base unit, you know that you can insert the scientific notation representing 1,000, a million, or a billion. When we go down to the other part of the chart, we see that we have deci, and that is 1/10, centi, which is 1/100th, milli, which is 1,000th, and then we go to micro and nano. For purposes of our class, you will probably see micro, and you might see nano occasionally. So really, we're talking about you knowing these prefixes that are on this chart right here without deca or hecto. Now when the exponent on the 10 is less than 0, a negative number, we're talking about a fraction of a meter, or of the fraction of the base unit. So if we're talking about 3 decimeters, we're really talking about 3 times 10, and we know that deci means 10 to the negative 1. 3 times 10 to the negative 1 meters. And 10 to the negative 1, it represents 0.1, so this would be equivalent to 0.3 meters, 3/10 of 1 meter. Centi is 100. It's a meter divided into 100 pieces. I would like to say that if you look at a meter stick, a decimeter is about as wide as your hand, your hand is approximately, it takes 10 of those to make up a meter, that a centimeter is about as wide as your little finger, and then a millimeter, or dividing up a meter into 1,000 pieces, is about as thick as your fingernail. Micro goes all the way down to 1/1,000th, so it takes 1,000,000 micrometers to make up 1 meter. And let's say we had a problem where we have 670 micrometers. What that means mathematically is 670 times 10 to the, and we look at the multiplier for micro, it's -6 times 10 to the -6 meters. And I realize that is not in proper scientific notation, but shh, I won't tell anyone, and your calculator will accept this number just like it is, and it doesn't need to be in proper scientific notation. So in summary, we can take any of the base units in SI and use these multipliers called prefixes to make numbers very large or very small based on whether we want multiple base units or fractions of base units. And here again, I would encourage you, if you have questions, please bring them up in class and I'd be happy to help you. Thanks and good luck.